Today's events highlight a deeper tension in American governance. When a judge orders the removal of legal counsel, the message reverberates far beyond the courtroom walls. It raises urgent questions about fairness, due process, and the concentration of power. Is this an isolated enforcement of courtroom decorum or a subtle reshaping of the rules to favor one side over another? Observers must recognize that such decisions, while legal, the moment when cell doors closed and federal marshals removed the defense after Judge Caldwell issued her order, is more than a mere procedural incident. It is a stark and dramatic illustration of the immense authority vested in the judiciary and the profound implications that such authority can have on the legal process, the perception of justice, and the public's understanding of fairness. In any courtroom, the presence of defense counsel is fundamental, not merely as a formality, but as a vital safeguard for the rights of the accused, ensuring that due process is respected and that legal arguments are presented in a manner that is coherent, deliberate, and consistent with established legal norms. When those counsel are forcibly removed, it disrupts the rhythm of the courtroom, creating a palpable tension that resonates beyond the immediate participants and echoes throughout the broader legal community, raising questions about the balance of power between the judge, the defense, and the mechanisms designed to maintain impartiality and protect civil liberties. Observers are compelled to consider why such an extreme step was taken, what precedents it may set, and how it influences not only the specific case at hand, but also the broader landscape of legal authority and judicial discretion. The act of marshals physically enforcing the removal underscores the literal and symbolic power of the court to control its proceedings and its participants, demonstrating that legal authority is not only theoretical, but can be exercised in ways that have immediate, tangible, and sometimes shocking consequences. At the same time, it challenges the public and legal observers to reflect on the delicate tension that exists in any legal system between maintaining order in the courtroom and preserving the fundamental rights of those involved, including the right to counsel, the right to mount a defense, and the expectation that proceedings are conducted in a manner that is fair and transparent. The imagery of cell doors closing serves as a metaphor as well as a literal event, symbolizing both the restriction of movement and the confinement of procedural freedoms, highlighting the fact that the courtroom is a space where power is concentrated and exercised with immediacy and finality. It also invites scrutiny of the role of the judge in determining what constitutes appropriate conduct and who is permitted to participate, raising complex questions about discretion, accountability, and the ways in which authority is exercised in high-stakes legal contexts. The presence of marshals in this scenario is significant not only because of their physical role in enforcing the court's order, but also because of the broader message it sends about compliance, control, and the enforcement of legal mandates. Their involvement transforms the abstract authority of the bench into a visible and tangible force, demonstrating the intersection of legal authority and physical enforcement and underscoring how the mechanisms of power operate in concert to achieve the court's objectives. It is also important to consider the psychological and procedural effects of such actions on all parties involved, including the defense team, the prosecution, witnesses, and the broader public, as the removal of counsel can create uncertainty, disrupt strategy, and raise concerns about impartiality and fairness. This event, while centered on a specific order and its immediate enforcement, serves as a microcosm of larger debates about judicial authority, the limits of discretion, and the ways in which procedural actions resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. It forces an examination of how legal systems balance order and rights, control and fairness, authority and accountability, and it reminds us that the enforcement of legal decisions even those that are technically within the bounds of judicial power, carries with it consequences that ripple through the legal system, the public's perception of justice, and the broader societal understanding of how power is exercised in moments of tension, conflict, and procedural dispute. The cell doors closing and the marshal's intervention are thus emblematic of both the immediacy of legal authority and the enduring questions it raises about justice, fairness, and the mechanisms through which law is applied, observed, and interpreted. The tension between authority and due process revealed by the removal of defense counsel following Judge Caldwell's order represents a profound challenge to the principles that underpin a fair and impartial legal system, illustrating how the exercise of judicial authority can intersect with and at times strain the protections designed to safeguard individual rights and procedural fairness. In any functioning legal system, the concept of due process serves as a cornerstone, ensuring that all parties have the opportunity to present their case, to respond to allegations, and to be heard by an impartial adjudicator. When a judge exercises authority in a manner that disrupts this process, whether through the removal of legal representation or the enforcement of strict courtroom measures, it raises critical questions about the limits of power and the responsibilities of those who wield it. Authority in the courtroom is not absolute in a moral sense, even if it is legally sanctioned. It is a tool that must be balanced against the ethical and procedural obligations owed to the individuals appearing before the court. The act of removing defense counsel therefore highlights a collision between the exercise of control and the principles of fairness, creating a scenario in which legal authority is vividly on display, but the equilibrium between power and process is brought into sharp relief. Observers are compelled to examine how such decisions impact not only the immediate case, but the broader perception of justice, as actions taken in moments of procedural enforcement carry symbolic weight that extends beyond the courtroom walls. The tension becomes particularly pronounced when the measures enforced are dramatic or unprecedented, as they can create the impression that authority is being wielded in a manner that prioritizes control over deliberation, compliance over dialogue, and procedural dominance over equitable treatment. This is not merely an abstract concern. The very presence of marshals and the physical enforcement of judicial orders communicates to all parties involved, as well as to the public, that authority can be asserted with immediacy and finality, and that deviation from the court's directives may have immediate consequences. While authority is necessary to maintain order and ensure that proceedings move forward efficiently, the challenge lies in ensuring that it is exercised in a way that does not undermine the fundamental rights of those involved or compromise the perception of fairness that is essential to maintaining public confidence in the legal system. The removal of defense counsel underscores the fragile balance that exists between the need for order and the imperative of due process, forcing a critical reflection on the mechanisms through which authority is exercised and the safeguards that must remain in place to prevent the overreach of power. Legal scholars and practitioners alike recognize that due process is not simply a set of procedural rules, but a manifestation of broader principles of justice, legitimacy, and ethical responsibility. When these principles are perceived to be under strain, the credibility of the judiciary itself can be called into question. Moreover, the tension between authority and due process has wider implications for the way the public interprets legal outcomes, as actions that appear heavy-handed or overly controlling can foster skepticism, erode trust, and provoke debate about the fairness of the system as a whole. The psychological and strategic effects on the defense team are equally significant, as the removal of counsel can disrupt legal strategy, create uncertainty, and alter the dynamics of courtroom interaction, demonstrating how the exercise of authority can have immediate and practical consequences in addition to symbolic ones. At the same time, the situation compels consideration of the judge's perspective, as authority is necessary to maintain decorum, prevent obstruction, and ensure that proceedings are conducted in an orderly manner, highlighting the inherent tension between the responsibilities of leadership and the ethical obligations owed to those whose rights and interests are directly affected. This delicate balance is further complicated by the public's role as observer, as every action taken by the court is filtered through the lens of perception, interpretation, and political context, raising questions about how authority and due process are communicated, justified, and understood. The case, therefore, serves as a powerful reminder that authority, even when legally justified, is not exercised in a vacuum, and that each decision has ripple effects that extend beyond the immediate circumstances, influencing public confidence, institutional legitimacy, and the broader understanding of justice. In examining the events surrounding the removal of the defense, one can see how the tension between authority and due process is not merely a procedural concern, but a central element in the ongoing dialogue about the balance of power, the preservation of rights, and the ethical exercise of judicial discretion, demonstrating that legal authority, when exercised in moments of conflict or controversy, is inseparable from the principles of fairness and legitimacy that sustain the rule of law. The incident underscores the importance of vigilance, reflection, and accountability in ensuring that authority serves justice rather than undermines it, illustrating that the tension between power and due process is both inevitable and essential to understanding how legal systems function in practice and perception. The questions raised about fairness and the concentration of judicial power following Judge Caldwell's order to remove the defense from the courtroom strike at the very heart of how justice is perceived and administered in any legal system, underscoring the delicate interplay between authority, procedure, and public trust. Fairness in a courtroom is not merely an abstract ideal, it is the practical manifestation of due process, impartiality, and the consistent application of the law. When defense counsel are forcibly removed under the direction of a judge, it introduces a complex set of concerns that go beyond the immediate tactical consequences for the parties involved, prompting a broader examination of how power is concentrated and exercised in the hands of a single judicial figure. This concentration of authority is not inherently problematic, as judges are entrusted with the responsibility to maintain order, enforce rules, and ensure that legal proceedings progress in a coherent manner. Yet the decision to physically remove counsel magnifies the stakes and exposes the potential for perceived or actual imbalance. Observers and legal scholars are compelled to interrogate the limits of such power, asking whether the exercise of authority aligns with principles of justice or whether it risks prioritizing control and compliance over the equitable treatment of all participants in the legal process. The issue of fairness extends beyond the immediate courtroom to touch on the public's perception of the legitimacy of the judicial system, as actions that appear abrupt, heavy-handed, or extraordinary can generate concerns about impartiality, bias, or the misuse of institutional authority. The removal of defense counsel highlights a fundamental tension between the need for judicial authority and the ethical obligation to safeguard fairness, raising questions about how the boundaries of power are defined, monitored, and justified in practice. In any system of law, fairness is operationalized through predictable procedures, clear rules, and equal access to the mechanisms of justice. Yet when these procedures are disrupted by the forceful exercise of discretion, the equilibrium is disturbed, creating an environment in which questions of legitimacy and trust inevitably emerge. The concentration of judicial power in this context does not simply refer to the legal authority of the judge, but also to the symbolic and practical influence that such an action exerts over the courtroom, the participants, and the broader public discourse, as the visibility of marshals enforcing the order communicates a tangible assertion of control that resonates far beyond the immediate legal proceedings. This convergence of authority and procedural disruption underscores the ways in which power, when exercised decisively and unilaterally, can shape perceptions of fairness, even when the actions are technically within the scope of legal prerogative. Moreover, the implications for the defense are significant, as the removal of counsel alters the dynamics of the courtroom, introduces strategic and psychological pressures, and may impact the ability to present arguments effectively, demonstrating that questions of fairness are not merely theoretical, but have concrete practical consequences that influence outcomes, strategies, and the administration of justice itself. The public dimension of this issue is equally important, as citizens rely on visible demonstrations of procedural fairness to gauge the legitimacy of the legal system, and any action that appears to concentrate power or undermine standard processes can erode confidence, provoke debate, and shape societal attitudes toward the rule of law. In this sense, the tension between fairness and concentrated authority is both immediate and enduring, reflecting an ongoing challenge in any legal system. How to ensure that judges have the necessary tools and discretion to manage proceedings effectively while simultaneously upholding the principles of equity, impartiality, and procedural integrity that sustain public trust. The situation also prompts reflection on the broader structural and institutional safeguards that exist to prevent the abuse of judicial power, including appellate review, professional oversight, and the norms of ethical conduct, highlighting the importance of mechanisms that balance authority with accountability, discretion with fairness, and power with legitimacy. Each of these considerations illustrates that questions of fairness and the concentration of power are inseparable from the larger framework of governance, public confidence, and the moral foundations of law, emphasizing that every procedural decision, particularly those involving the removal of defense counsel, carries weight far beyond the immediate parties and can reverberate throughout the legal system and society at large. The case also serves as a reminder that concentrated judicial authority, while necessary for maintaining order and enforcing legal standards, must always be contextualized within an ethical framework that prioritizes fairness, respects the rights of all participants, and preserves the perception of impartiality that is critical to sustaining trust in the system. In examining the events surrounding Judge Caldwell's order, it becomes clear that questions of fairness and authority are deeply intertwined, reflecting the ongoing tension between the necessity of decisive judicial action and the equally essential requirement to uphold procedural equity, illustrating that the administration of justice is not solely about legal compliance, but also about the careful, principled exercise of power in a manner that reinforces rather than undermines the legitimacy of the judicial process. Every decision, every order, and every action within the courtroom sends a message about how authority is wielded and how fairness is preserved, shaping both the outcomes of individual cases and the broader societal understanding of justice, emphasizing that concentrated power carries with it a profound responsibility to ensure that fairness is not only maintained, but visibly upheld, thereby sustaining confidence, legitimacy, and the integrity of the rule of law.